For over 70 years, the United States has engineered the rise and fall of foreign governments. This strategy reached toward Tehran and Guatemala City, Kinshasa and Santiago, Managua, Kabul, and Baghdad. The mechanical act of toppling a leader is a calculation of intelligence and force, but once the structure of a state is dismantled, the aftermath becomes impossible to map. This interventionist streak was driven by two distinct historical pressures: the ideological paranoia of the Cold War and the later expansion of the War on Terror. Washington's approach is not a single static plan. It is an evolving playbook that transitioned from clandestine, deniable coups to massive, overt military invasions. Early Cold War interventions were rarely triggered by military threats. Instead, they occurred where anti-communist fears intersected with the protection of Western economic interests. In 1953, the focus was Iran. Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh had nationalized the country's oil industry, threatening the profits of Western energy firms. To reverse this, small teams of intelligence operatives orchestrated his removal and installed a compliant monarch, the Shah, back into absolute power. The mechanism was deceptively simple. Agents used radio broadcasts and paid dissidents to create the illusion of a spontaneous, grassroots popular uprising. In 1954, this blueprint was exported to Guatemala. When the government attempted to redistribute land held by the United Fruit Company, U.S.-backed rebels moved to seize control. These operations offered cheap, short-term geopolitical gains. However, they also established a secret playbook that encouraged future administrations to ignore the long-term political costs of covert action. By the 1960s, the logic shifted to domino theory. To bleed Soviet influence without a direct nuclear confrontation, the U.S. began financing and arming local proxies. These indirect wars turned entire regions into battlegrounds. In Africa, the struggle for post-independence control left millions of families trapped in a cycle of displacement and violence. In Latin America, Washington shifted to funding local military elements to crush political opposition. This support paved the way for brutal authoritarian rule in countries like Chile. Throughout the 1980s, the tactic evolved into the direct arming of paramilitary groups, like the Nicaraguan Contras, tasked with destabilizing governments hostile to American interests. The strategy peaked in Afghanistan. To repel a Soviet invasion, the U.S. funneled sophisticated weaponry and billions of dollars to religious fighters on the rugged frontiers. While these proxy wars achieved the immediate goal of stalling Soviet expansion, the unchecked flow of weapons and money into these regions guaranteed a violent backlash for decades to come. The 9/11 attacks ended the era of deniability. Plausible deniability was replaced by a visible, large-scale war on terror. The new mechanism used conventional military force and international coalitions to publicly decapitate regimes, starting with the Taliban and moving rapidly to Iraq and Saddam Hussein. These invasions delivered lightning-fast military victories, but destroying the state's existing security apparatus created massive power vacuums that coalition forces were unprepared to fill. The U.S. attempted to deploy a massive state-building apparatus to reconstruct these nations, only to be met with sustained resistance from the local population. The resulting insurgencies proved that overwhelming force can remove a dictator, but it cannot easily assemble a functioning, stable government out of the wreckage. The progression of this playbook shows a clear trajectory, from the quiet, deniable operations of the 1950s to the massive, conventional invasions of the 21st century. For 70 years, strategic planning has focused on the point of collapse, while the complex social and political reactions that follow have repeatedly eluded Washington's control. Weapons distributed during the proxy era of the 1980s directly equipped the factions that the U.S. eventually fought in the overt wars of the 2000s. These interventions created a global landscape where American influence is now inextricably tied to the local instability these operations helped create. Each action on the map carries the enduring weight of its unintended consequences.